Tossing and turning at night? Waking up exhausted? We've all been there. Sounds like it's time to try the melatonin-free CBD sleep gummies from Cornbread Hemp. Cornbread Hemp produces America's first USDA organic, melatonin-free CBD gummy. Fall asleep and stay asleep with CBD sleep gummies that are infused with full-spectrum, flower-only hemp extract and include natural botanicals like valerian root, lavender, and chamomile. They're vegan, gluten-free, and made without a sugar coating. Just clean, natural ingredients. Right now, Cornbread Hemp is offering 30% off your first order. Just go to cornbreadhemp.com/whatnext and use code WHATNEXT at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/whatnext, code WHATNEXT for 30% off.
Recently, we asked some people about sharing their New York Times accounts.
My name is Dana. I am a subscriber to the New York Times, but my husband isn't. And it would be really nice to be able to share a recipe or an article or compete with him in Wordle or Connections. Thank you.
Dana, we heard you. Introducing the New York Times Family Subscription. One subscription, up to 4 separate logins for anyone in your life. Find out more at nytimes.com/family.
I can honestly say I've never watched an episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live before this week. But when Disney announced that the late night host was coming back on the air Tuesday, I knew I'd figure out how to, if not tune in, well, there'd definitely be a YouTube link somewhere. What stands out to me from Kimmel's monologue Tuesday night, without looking back, it's the way his voice cracked when he talked about Charlie Kirk.
You understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man.
I remember him imploring his audience to take the threats to free speech and an independent press seriously.
They want to pick and choose what the news is. I know that's not as interesting as muzzling a comedian, but it's so important to have a free press, and it is nuts that we aren't paying more attention to it.
And he also made what felt like this sincere call to national unity. He was invoking people like Candace Owens and Senator Ted Cruz, trying to position them, if not on his side, then at least somewhere in his corner when it came to the White House's efforts to put him out of work.
Maybe most of all, I want to thank the people who don't support my show and what I believe, but support my right to share those beliefs anyway.
The whole thing was fine. I'm thinking a lot about what my colleague Luke Winkie wrote when he recapped the show for Slate.com. Conservatives are now the ones setting the parameters of taste, Luke wrote, and Kimmel, in his own way, has fallen into line. The censorship campaign is still working as intended. We just haven't realized it yet.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, I'm glad he's back on the air.
That's Karen Attiah. For the past 11 years, Karen was one of the most prominent writers and editors for The Washington Post. But like Jimmy Kimmel, like dozens of others, Karen lost her job for stuff she wrote in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. In Karen's case, 2 phrases got her fired. The first was, quote, refusing to tear my clothes and smear ashes on my face in performative mourning for a white man that espoused violence is not the same as violence. The other phrase was, part of what keeps America so violent is the insistence that people perform care, empty goodness, and absolution for white men who espouse hatred and violence. Karen says that second one wasn't even directly about Kirk. It was referring to the white man who shot and killed a Democratic lawmaker earlier this year. I wanted to talk to Karen because, unlike Jimmy Kimmel, she doesn't have her job back.
The First Amendment is only as good as the people who decide to defend it, particularly journalism institutions that depend on that First Amendment instead of capitulating to intimidation, fear, and ignorance, in my case. So I'm watching Jimmy, but I'm also still fighting my own case. There is still this climate of intimidation against media and broadcasting networks, against anyone who criticizes whether it's Trump or whether, Charlie Kirk's legacy, memory. that threat is still there, even though Kimmel is back.
Today on the show, if this week was a win for free speech, why are so many people still silent? I'm Rob Gunther, filling in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
During that conversation, we're like, well, I wonder if it's the same with AI, right? Are we using a lot of power in AI that's not giving us a great benefit? And that's really what sort of kicked off a series of research efforts around this, trying to understand how do we make things more energy efficient.
So this was the 21st century equivalent of Newton's apple falling from a tree.
Join me, Chris Hadfield, on the On Energy podcast.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. With the weather getting cooler, if you're like me, you're looking around for a couple of new items for your wardrobe, like a new sweater, some cute new kicks. And Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I went over to Saks.com to check out what they've got on tap, and I gotta say, what I love about clicking around their website is that every piece looks special, one of a kind. As if you'd walk into the office or a party and instantly grab everyone's attention. All the big brands are there, stuff like Alice and Olivia, you know, the young and trendy stuff. I love that I can see the care in every piece Saks has chosen for their fall collections. Each dress or pant or shoe feels a little bit elevated. So if you want shopping to be fun and easy, head over to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day.
Karen told me she didn't always think she was going to be a journalist. She once worked as an analyst for the organization Freedom House, which keeps track of attacks on the free press around the globe. Fred Hyatt, the late editor at the Washington Post, thought that expertise could serve her well in the opinion section. He became a mentor for her transition to full-time journalism.
One thing that he told me as an editorial writer, as a journalist, is reporters have to write about the world as it is. And editorial writers and opinion writers, we have the privilege and sometimes the burden of writing about the world as we think it should be. And I've always taken that to heart. So I started as a digital producer. I actually started, speaking of social media, helping to craft social media guidelines for the opinion section. Like, they saw I was so good at social media. I was helping to train other columnists in how to be better at the internet. Twitter, especially, social media was my weapon of choice before becoming a journalist. So I started out there. And because of my background in international sort of relations and press freedom issues, I then raised my hand to create the job of a global opinions editor, in which it was my job to create a section where we could recruit voices from around the world, prominent voices and journalists from around the world, particularly the ones that had been challenged and banned in their own countries. So probably people know me most for, or know the writer most, is Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi, who is a very prominent Saudi journalist. He was forced to keep quiet in Saudi Arabia. And I found his name in a New York Times article after Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was cracking down on the society, and recruited him. I was like, hey, do you want to write for the global opinion section? And I just started, and he said yes. And he then ended up writing for us for a year and then was murdered, as many people know, in a Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. So, of course, that was a low.
I wonder if we could pause there for a second, because I was working in media at the time, and I just remember that moment in all of journalism seemed to be a time where everyone was coming together, all the big networks, all the small networks. It really seemed like the power of the press was in full force, and they weren't letting the story go. It's just so striking, because you said it's a low point, and I kind of think about it as a high point in terms of what the press can do when it lives up to its potential.
1,000%. I mean, both. I mean, it was probably the most horrifying experience, of my life, sort of personally and professionally. But the way that American mainstream media rallied around Jamal, rallied around me, rallied around the Post, and I remember saying, look, the Post battle to get justice for Jamal in this murder is a battle for journalism more broadly, right? Is a battle against this idea that anyone can silence you from wherever you are just because you've written an opinion in a newspaper. And I agree with you. It was really heartening to see the media, CNN, MSNBC, it was on all the networks doing a full court press and literally not letting the story die. So it was an example of what can happen when the media wants to focus its attention and on who.
And you personally were elevated. I mean, on your Substack page, you have pictures sitting next to Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. You got so many awards. You got the Polk Award for that reporting, for bringing him on. I'm just wondering, like, when you're sitting next to Jeff Bezos in that moment when journalism is really just like, has this flag planted for all the things we think journalism is supposed to do, not just at the Post. What did Jeff Bezos say to you in the moment? Was he like, congratulations, we're with you, keep it up?
Pretty much, yes. And, Bezos had come to the Washington Post even before everything happened with Jamal. He would meet with us and he would say, be provocative, be swashbuckling, be different, be interesting as an opinion section. And then, he was very much, a part of the story with Jamal. He went to Jamal's funeral in Istanbul, actually. And then, sat next to me at the Gridiron dinner. And that was when I was catapulted into these super elite spaces. I'm literally sitting next to Jeff Bezos, and to go from that as the embodiment, right, of for the Washington Post of what it looks like to have your journalists back, to then why you and I are sitting and talking now is it's still whiplash. Like, who was the real Washington Post that I was dealing with? Who was the real Jeff Bezos that I was dealing with?
The whiplash began way before Karen was fired. At the beginning of the second Trump administration, Jeff Bezos sat behind Trump at his inauguration, and Amazon made a $1 million donation to the inauguration fund. And within months, Bezos announced a, quote, significant shift that would take place in the Post opinion section. Its old editor left. Its new editor promised to overhaul the page, in keeping with the Bezos mandate that its writers focus almost entirely on stories that are about, quote, defending personal liberties and a free market.
So basically, it was a constriction, a very, very, very narrow constriction of what was going to be allowed to be on the opinion page of the Washington Post, one of the world's most known newspapers.
How did you take that? Did you take that as a message personally? Did you take it as a message to your broader op-ed cohort?
I saw it as warnings of censorship. I mean, how else could one really interpret that? But, and I think for me, I think for a lot of people that it was very vague, right? Like, what exactly does personal liberties mean? What exactly, free markets mean? And part of what was hard was the lack of transparency about what exactly those things really meant. For my sake, I just was like, I've always written about people being free, wanting people to be free, to be able to express themselves, to be able to be who they are without being oppressed just because of who they look, or what they look like, or where they're from, or the color of their skin. So I'm just like, I've always been for this, and I've always been for a free market of ideas. So to me, I'm like, I don't think I'm really at odds, right? But yeah, I think as the statement stands, I wanted people to understand. I'm like, guys, do y'all understand that this pretty much amounts to censorship of a broad range of views, and this is not good.
Yeah, and we saw that sort of mood, that ominous mood that you're talking about, reflected in the steady stream of employees who either were forced out or left the paper. What was the mood like over the course of that time?
Well, obviously I've been out, but the mood I hear is quite grim, quite sort of dejected. And it's still, despite everything that's happened to me, it's painful because I think if you talk to any Washington Post journalists, so many people really, truly love the place and love the culture. There's a reason why I stayed for 11 years, right? Like, and so it's really hard to see what has been happening there. It's hard to see my colleagues or former colleagues just really down. I think what was striking for me for a long time, being the last Black full-time opinion staffer period, is we're supposed to serve Washington, D.C., which for the majority of its history was majority Black. Still is something hovering around 30-40% Black. So to sort of take out systematically the Black opinion writers, whether by buying them out, now me forcing them out, and not having any sort of second thoughts or shame as to how that would look or impact the journalism or impact our news side colleagues is really quite, it's staggering. I still don't understand it.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This is a real good story about Bronx and his dad, Ryan, real United Airlines customers.
We were returning home, and one of the flight attendants asked Bronx if he wanted to see the flight deck and meet Captain Andrew.
I got to sit in the driver's seat.
I grew up in an aviation family, and seeing Bronx kind of reminded me of myself when I was that age.
That's Andrew, a real United pilot.
These small interactions can shape a kid's future.
It felt like I was the captain.
Allowing my son to see the flight deck will stick with us forever.
That's how good leads the way.
Let's get into the stated reason why you were fired from the Washington Post. According to the letter that you posted from the Washington Post, you were quote, putting your colleagues in danger, which I think is, we can all say, is maybe a stretch because, like you said, you started at the Washington Post. You've been steeped in digital culture, in how social media works as a tool of journalism for years. If you read the full context of what you were saying, it's clear that that's not what you were doing. Tell us what happened.
Right. So my posts, and they're still up because I still see nothing wrong with them. My posts was very much about, my God, like shock, expressing shock. Political violence is wrong. This murder is wrong. And also more so my critique, and this has just been something that I critique in general throughout my work, is that I'm always looking at how do we as a people make sense of our society and our culture, meaning how do we talk about it, how do we process it? And so the cliches, in my opinion at least, that were coming through, which was thoughts and prayers and political violence has no place here, and this is not who we are, that sort of thing. Those kind of cliches were coming through, which I was like, I'm so tired of this. I said that I do not care for this empty rhetoric. We keep proclaiming violence has no place here, and it shouldn't, right? But it does. We just had seen the CDC get shot up hundreds of times with a police officer killed not too long ago. Melissa Hortman, the Minnesota lawmaker, who was assassinated along with her husband and her dog just a few months ago. So my commentary was thinking about all these things and then specifically referencing the Minnesota shootings. And I'm like, we keep saying violence has no place here, but look at what happened in Minnesota. This happened, and we shrugged and we moved on. And that's what I said. And under that, and this is the quote that the Post claims to take issue with. Under that post that was referencing the Minnesota shootings, I said part of what normalizes and keeps America so violent is the instinct to sort of coddle, to excuse, and to perform empty care and goodness and absolution for white men who espouse violence and hatred. In my mind, I was thinking about the fact that the shooter in the Minnesota case was a white man. I think if you go and shoot and kill a woman and her husband and her dog, I think you espouse violence and hatred. So that seemed not controversial, so uncontroversial that I didn't even get an angry face emoji. I didn't get any sort of backlash. I went on about my day into the next day until I get a missed call from a Washington Post number. And then maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, notice of termination. And that was it.
Wow. It's very matter of fact.
Yeah, no conversation, no sort of, chance to get a right of reply. I've never been formally disciplined, ever. Never been sort of formally disciplined, for social media posts. I'm paid to give social media commentary. This is my purview under the social media policy. So literally, I was fired for, and the letter specifically said I had disparaged white men in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk, and that was a breach of the social media policies. When again, anyone can see I specifically, which is the restrictive relative clause, the grammar for the grammar nerds, whatever that means, I specifically said violent white men or white men who espouse violence. I do not believe all white men do that, unless the Post does, and then they can, that's on them.
Well, I mean, your termination came along with dozens of people who lost their jobs, and it came after Vice President J.D. Vance guest hosted the Charlie Kirk show and basically called on his political supporters to snitch on everyone. When, quote, when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. Hell, call their employer. We don't believe in political violence. We believe in civility. Why do you think in the days after there was such an eagerness to follow those instructions?
Yeah, I mean, this, which is interesting, coming from the side of free speech warriors and anti-cancel culture warriors, right? I saw it on my news feeds, and people, that I've known and followed, like being whipped into this revenge frenzy. I saw them posting, I've been sitting on the phone all day, calling these strangers that I don't know, trying to destroy their lives over this man who never knew I existed, right? There's a lot to be said for sort of parasocial relationships and people almost over-identifying with these celebrity sort of culture in general, perhaps. I mean, the shooter they still didn't have a motive.
Right.
And it wasn't just people losing their jobs and being snitched on, even though, again, the suspected shooter, the alleged shooter in Charlie Kirk's case was a white man from Utah. The next day, people are losing their jobs, and HBCUs, Black colleges and universities, get that threats.
I'm thinking also about what the conservatives were allowed to say in this moment. You had Brian Kilmeade offhandedly say that homeless people should be euthanized. He only had to give an apology.
Right.
At Charlie Kirk's memorial service over the weekend, we saw Trump saying that he hates his political enemies. We saw Stephen Miller give this very Nazi-esque speech where he's saying, quote, "We are the storm and our enemies cannot comprehend our strength, our determination, our resolve, our passion, our lineage, and our legacy hails back to Athens, to Rome, to Philadelphia, to Monticello." I would argue that is a very explicit call to violence.
I would agree with that. And it just proves my point right, right? I mean, in the sense of that this is allowed, that this is normalized, that, folks like Vance and folks like the president can openly espouse this hatred for this sort of nebulous kind of enemy, because without it, kind of who are they to an extent, right? Without some opponent, they have, and Joy Reid said this on the show, it's like I think it's hard to comprehend their anger, to me at least personally, because it's just like, you have the presidency, you've got Congress, you've basically got the Supreme Court, you've purged Black people, you're making women basically lose control of like their reproductive autonomy. You have won. What are you so angry about? And not only angry about, but angry that you want to, and you know, I don't even think about it as cancel culture anymore. I say right now, I'm like, that is annihilation culture.
Yeah.
That is not debate. That is not free speech. That is domination. And that's just pure power for the sake of what end?
So right now, you are having a grievance filed on your behalf because of your termination from the Washington Post. What are your next steps? I know you're very active on Substack. How do you hope to get your message out to as big of an audience as you had under the Washington Post?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if anything, it's like I said, I'll keep speaking. If anything, I'm more liberated now, I suppose. So a lot of my friends in independent media are like, come on in, the water's fine. It's okay. You're safe. Like, so yeah, I'm excited for the sort of next adventure. I will be on Substack. I'm exploring, you know, other things, other opportunities. My Substack is Golden Hour, so people can subscribe there. I also, this is not the first time of being canceled, right? Mm-hmm. So anyone who's followed me knows that I was teaching at Columbia and teaching a class on race and journalism, which under this climate was also canceled. So I decided to teach it myself and taught online a version of race, media, and international affairs to a class of 500 people. So I'll be doing that again in a couple of weeks as well. So yeah, I guess I'm in my rogue radical professor era as well. So like, I suppose what my job in this is just to keep going and to keep teaching about our own history, is to keep up the memory of journalists that have been silenced. For me, the closest and most tragic example was Jamal Khashoggi. Karen, what are you up to next? I'm going to keep moving. I'm not going anywhere.
Karen, Attiah, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Karen Attiah is a former columnist for the Washington Post. She also runs the Resistance Studies series. We reached out to the Washington Post for comment, but they declined to comment on personnel matters. That's the show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Paige Osburn is the senior supervising producer of What Next and What Next TBD. Mia Lobel is the head of audio here at Slate. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations. And I am Rob Gunther, filling in for Mary Harris. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm at @1RobGunther. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.